Well, good day and welcome to another podcast, a video cast of the Office of the Medical Director. Today we're going to talk with Chief Ben Oakley, and Captain Maldonado is going to add some commentary on a recent tornado that they had touched down in the Blanco County area of Round Mountain. A EF1 tornado came through about 5:30 in the morning and caused some devastation in one of the local RV parks.
Yeah, Destiny, immediately when I drove into Round Mountain, I could tell a tornado had been through there. One place that had substantial amount of damage was a local RV park.
This is getting less of a mess.
A tornado ripped through the Hofbrau RV park in Round Mountain at around 5 this morning. Thomas Thompson is cleaning up, but this isn't his home.
I didn't know any of these people before I came over here today, and I still don't.
Thompson says when he heard what happened, he packed up his chainsaw and drove out to help. Helping RV residents like Brenda Brown and her husband.
Amazing. Amazing. God is working today.
Brown says this morning she was abruptly woken up by her trailer shaking.
We heard the hail and the thunder, and the trailer was rocking, and we got up and just braced ourselves till it passed.
Besides a broken window and some trees thrown around, Brown says the damage to her home was minor, but can't say the same for her neighbors.
There's trailers on their side. They're moved off their lots. It's sad.
But this location, there's 35 RVs, of which there's 5 with major damage, major and or total loss.
EMS Chief Ben Oakley says just at this RV park alone, 40 people have been impacted.
No fatalities at all. There are 2 people injured. Nobody had to be hospitalized.
He says his team plans to be out here for a while, helping residents like Brown clean up.
It's not what we planned, but by the grace of God, we're alive.
And if you would like to help donate to anyone impacted by this tornado, visit our website at fox7austinnews.com.
So Ben, thanks for joining us. And we wanted you just to go through kind of some of the pre-planning, the pre-notification with the tornado watch. Tell us a little bit about what the actions were and how the day's events unfolded. It's not something that everybody gets to experience and go through. And so we really wanted to take this opportunity for you to share some of your thoughts as the EMS chief, things that the rest of us can do to be prepared for these type of events when they may happen in our area. And then Julian has some really interesting footage from the National Oceanographic and Administration to kind of show a little bit, which we thought would be interesting for us. So Ben, feel free, share some of your thoughts with us on what happened early on Friday morning. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Dr. Manifold. So it was actually on a Sunday morning, so Easter Sunday, April the 12th. But the backstory on it was actually a few days before this happened, we had been actually having some discussions, since we're already under a disaster declaration and responding with COVID-19, about how we would handle any additional disasters that happen, because it has implications as far as sheltering operations and things like that. So ironically, we did have a conversation about it last week, and it talked about this very thing, not even knowing that the weather was headed our way. So then fast forward to Saturday, we started getting notifications from the National Weather Service, and the local office here does a great job. And the morning, we had got the initial notification Saturday morning that there was a tornado risk. And then actually Saturday evening, something happened that we don't see very often, where they sent an update saying that their confidence in tornadoes was much higher. So we had already begun kind of preparing at that time, and we had personnel and emergency management and everybody monitoring the situation throughout the night. So as far as when it actually happened, emergency management did get a notification about 30 minutes ahead of it, knowing that this thing was coming, and it was, they could almost guarantee that a tornado was going to come in, which...
So Ben, that's great. So a 30-minute notification, and then how was that notification made?
So there was actually direct communication between Paul, our meteorologist, and our emergency management coordinator, but also as far as the general public, they had already drawn out the polygons and sent out tornado warnings via the emergency notifications. So went out via phone, cell phone, all those alerts for anyone in that area went out right away.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, so that started that process. The tornado actually touched down somewhere around 5:30 in the morning, and at about 5:32, we started getting 911 calls on people trapped in homes and things like that, which prompted an initial response of several agencies. And they got there. Our emergency management coordinator and our deputy emergency management coordinator both live in Round Mountain, so they were actually one of the first ones there, and were able to confirm that this tornado had come through. So as Dr. Manifold mentioned, it was an EF1 tornado. The damage path was about 200 yards wide, and about the path was about 6 miles long. And if the fact that we're under a pandemic and it was a holiday and a Sunday and it was a nocturnal tornado, which could be really deadly, wasn't enough. It happened to take a direct hit on 2 different RV parks within our northern portion of our county. So the first location we ended up at was that first RV park, which was covered on the news, the Hofbrau RV Park. And when our first units got there, it's just, you couldn't even access it. There was obviously no power. Everything was kind of wiped out and substantial debris. And our crews began working towards the initial 911 calls, which were people who were still trapped and either, flipped RVs and things of that nature. So they were able to get to them pretty quickly, probably within like the first 30 minutes. They were able to get to the worst of that particular RV park, and our crews began extrication and cutting down some walls and getting people out of there. So from there, fortunately, probably the most shocking thing regarding this whole incident was really the lack of substantial injuries. As soon as we heard that a tornado had come through at nighttime, which even though we send out notifications, a lot of times it's not successful in waking people up and they have no clue this thing's coming. So a tornado going through not one but 2 RV parks, we knew there was a lot of potential for patients. So we instantly had 4 or 5 ambulances within our county responding. We called back personnel, just activated everything that we could to get resources there as quickly as possible. And resources started rolling in quickly. There were a few patients with minor injuries. One initially had like some musculoskeletal trauma, like a possible dislocation of his shoulder, and another had a medical complaint and some minor trauma from being in a trailer that flipped. But overall, the initial triage was good, or it didn't indicate that we had a ton of patients, but we had plenty of medic units there and fire units from all over the county. From there, our crews began search and rescue. So one of the biggest challenges we had up front was at this particular RV park. A lot of the residences there aren't primary residences, so a lot of it are for like linemen and other entities where they drive in from other places, and that's where they stay during the week. And there was no manifest or roster from the owner of the location, so we had no way of identifying which ones were occupied, which ones weren't. So it took all of our crews going through and systematically searching through the park and going through every trailer.
Yeah, I'm sure that can be challenging and frustrating when you don't have any accountability of who's there, who's going for the weekend and things like that. And so you probably were double checking and triple checking your areas, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing is, typically with, situations like this, pretty early on how many patients you're dealing with or potentially dealing with. And, And that was the one thing we struggled with is, it could be 2 like we had, or it could have been, 100 plus. And knowing that up early is important for getting the right resources that we need. So we kind of just targeted the middle of the road.
Sounds like you had a good match of needs and resources that were readily available for you. I know that Round Mountain had the primary response and their volunteer organization, and then you also had Johnson City as well as North Blanco EMS. Who else responded from a first responder aspect for you guys?
Yeah, so we had all 3 fire departments in the county, Round Mountain, Johnson City, and Blanco. We had all of our medic units from ESD1 and ESD2. We also had a substantial response from law enforcement. They called in a bunch of people between sheriff's office, and we got 4 or 5 troopers as well pretty quickly. So we had a really strong initial response, and all of those resources were there within the first hour, which again, when you're dealing with a bunch of volunteer organizations and volunteer fire departments on a Sunday morning on a holiday at 5 in the morning in the middle of a storm, and these people live in the impacted area, it was awesome to see how quickly we got a
Yeah,
bunch of
it's
resources there.
truly identifies the volunteerism that's in our country and in our area. And so we're truly appreciative of that and members providing, again, of their time and service, maintaining their training and certifications for moments just like this when they can be there to help protect their communities. And so they certainly have that added interest in being able to do that. And a great shout out to you and the OEM and leadership in the county for having the resources available and having the immediate response like you did. You guys did what sounds like a fantastic job of getting folks taken care of. As far as the rescue, we're not going to concentrate on the specifics of that, but I presume that most of the rescue was able to be accomplished with hand tools and some K-12s and maybe a chainsaw or two. Were there any other major rescues, extrications that required any other resources outside of what we might consider a traditional fire rescue company resource?
Yeah, no, so all of our rescue was, 95% of our work that entire day. It was a long day, but most of the chainsaw work. As far as the residences, they were easily accessed with K-12s. We did utilize Travis County Starflight though, because when the sun rose up, within that first hour, and we quickly identified the magnitude of this event. What was concerning to me, and maybe I'm a pessimist, but we weren't getting any calls from anywhere else. It was all isolated here, but there was a clear path across the highway. We knew this tornado didn't just hit this one RV park. So, but accessing other parts of the track when we didn't even technically know the track other than a general direction. I didn't know how far behind me and how far ahead of me this thing went. And it could have been, total destruction where people couldn't call. So we did bring in Travis County Starflight pretty early to fly the entire path and give us a preliminary track. And they did locate the other RV park, which was heavily damaged and not accessible. So we did hoist in a rescue over there to complete initial triage of those people and hold them over till we could get a ground unit there with about an hour after that.
Always great to have folks from Starflight, and the ability to have that extra piece. One of the other strategies you and I talked about that early morning when you called was also drone capability for surveillance and operational components that some people will have access to. So another great tool that we're learning how to use in the future. But hey, I know you had a few pictures. Would you share a few of those with us and let folks get a little more of a visual representation as well from your perspective?
Sure thing. Let's pull this up here. All right, can you guys see that okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
So this was, I actually snapped this picture. This was pretty early on. This was around 6 a.m. And this was one of the first RVs that were in the very back that had flipped a couple times. There was a lady stuck in the middle of this, so you can see the actual extrication. This wasn't particularly challenging. It was just a matter of A, getting to it, and then B, getting the equipment to it, and then C, getting her out. But the nice, while mobile homes and RVs and travel trailers are not ideal and don't do well in tornadoes, the nice thing is the exterior metal is so thin that it's it's pretty easy to actually gain access to them. So that was how our morning started. From there, this was where we set up our staging area right off 281, and you can see this is right when Starflight was coming in. This was probably right around 7 o'clock, and while all of our guys were still to the left of the picture in this first RV park doing search and rescue, and basically this tornado came across the highway here, and you can kind of start to see the track over here on where it went. That's just showing them coming inbound. So this was the second RV park. And this was where we couldn't access initially. That was a couple miles further down the track where we inserted that rescuer. What's interesting about this is this particular one was a substantial distance from its original location. So this actually got picked up, spun a few times in the air while it was occupied with a man and his wife and laying in bed, and they had no clue or no notification that this was coming, and then it landed on its roof. So they actually self-extricated. This was a guy that had a potential shoulder dislocation, but when you think of that this thing literally went flying through the air, pretty crazy that's the only injuries that we saw.
Yeah, that looks like that would have been a heck of a ride in that RV for that morning thing. So
absolutely. So this was another structure. I believe this was a barn initially that's just completely collapsed. Additional ones here, just all of these got tied up in the trees, or as you can see here, this was another, I think this was a hunting cabin here on the left that was just completely destroyed as well. Yeah, this was a hunting cabin. Fortunately, that wasn't occupied at the time. And same kind of thing is this continues down the track all the way through.
yeah, it's amazing the devastation for people who haven't seen one of these that come through. You can't imagine trees being uprooted like this, buildings tossed around, vehicles. I had the honor of going through Joplin, Missouri a number of years ago when we had a big tornado up there, and look, the widespread component potential for multiple agencies, or not agencies, but different locations having to work in a dispersed area, all adds to complexity. And so once again, I think you guys did a wonderful job. I really appreciate all of the efforts of the responders and you sharing those experiences with us. Fortunately, we had no loss of life and relatively minor injuries, and we're able to help put those folks back together as quickly as possible with their lives and a place to live. Right now, I don't think we have time to go into all of the recovery strategies. Fortunately, again, relatively low number of people involved. Sometimes you have to worry about providing housing, coordinating with the Red Cross and other agencies to come in. So again, all add to a little bit of the complexity of an incident such as this. Julian, you had some interesting graphics, and if you'd like to pull those up and share with the group, I think that would be really great to see a little bit of the activity from the weather radar and things.
Yeah, so what I have here is next generation weather radar archive data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And this kind of gives us a glimpse of how the storm moved through the area and where the potential touchdown and damage could have been. So on the left side of the screen, we have our conventional reflectivity image that we always see But on the right here, we have what's called the storm relative velocity, which gives us a really good indication of how air is moving and rotating through the storm, possibly causing a tornado. So we see here a kind of mix of red and green showing air moving towards or away from the radar and kind of circling around each other. And as it exits northeast of Fredericksburg and enters Round Mountain, just crossing 281, we can see it's pretty distinct that there's rotation that indicates high likelihood of a tornado, which of course can't be confirmed until someone on the ground either confirms it visually or damage confirmed. So that gives us a great, but we can also pull up 3D imaging that can show us where the rotation was as it traveled through the area. What we're looking at here, this dark blue with green in the middle, that is what the radar picked up as far as rotation with the clouds almost touching the ground. Again, radar can't see the ground level, but we can assume based off the data that we have now and the pictures that we saw that this indeed was a tornado that did touch the ground as it moved through the area and quickly dissipated after it crossed the county line heading towards Austin.
Yeah, pretty neat stuff. And it looked like the upper cloud level was up around 30,000 feet or so. Again, so a good sized storm, and we're able to follow the path. And so again, neat, pretty interesting imaging that we're able to provide that goes along with that. So thanks, Julian, for sharing that with us. Ben, any other closing thoughts or ideas, things you'd want to share with our community of responders out there?
Not really. I just, would reiterate a lot of the planning scenarios that everybody does in this particular situation. This seems like one of those scenarios that we kind of joke about when preparing for, and that you never think will happen. So I would just, challenge people to never stop planning and assuming the worst will happen, because you never know what's going to happen the next day.
Yeah, and we're not considered what's Tornado Alley, but this is certainly a natural event that we are at risk for, and we should always be prepared for. And thank goodness for the early warning systems that are out there. And sometimes it's easy to take those for granted, but we should pay heed to those as everyday citizens, let alone emergency responders. And it's great to have those systems in place. Again, Ben, to you and the team, the folks in Blanco County who respond to this, thank you so much for all that you do on a day-to-day basis, and particularly the volunteers who were there to help assist and provide response in this area is fantastic. And obviously I'm a little biased for EMS responders and the firefighters and law enforcement folks. Again, you guys did a great job, and appreciate you sharing your story with us today. So thanks so much. You guys have a great day. Thank you.